It is even possible that my ancestry might not move in the direction of ancient Israel at all. After 965, the Khazars were through as an organized power, but Judaism may have remained. And it may well be that many East European Jews are descended from Khazars and the people they ruled. I may be one of them. Who knows? And who cares? Isaac Asimov. It's been a good life, 2002. All right, so we're going to be reading from this book, okay? It's an international bestseller, okay, by Shlomo Sand. The Invention of the Jewish People. That's the name of the book. And again, this is one of their own people saying that. It's not me. I didn't write this book. Fair use. Shlomo Sand argues that most Jews actually descend from converts whose native lands were scattered far across the Middle East and Eastern Europe. The formation of a Jewish people and then a Jewish nation out of these disparate groups could only take place under the sway of a new historiography, developing in response to the rise of nationalism throughout Europe. Beneath the biblical backfill of the 19th century historians and the 20th century intellectuals who replaced rabbis as the architects of Jewish identity, architects, code word. The invention of the Jewish people uncovers a new narrative of Israel's formation and proposes a bold analysis of nationalism and accounts for the old myth. So now we're going to belly flop to this part of the book. Again, we're in the book, The Invention of the Jewish People. It says here, Jewish Khagans, a strange empire rises in the East. In the middle of the 10th century, the Sephardic Golden Age, Hasdai ibn Shaprut, a physician and important statesman in the court of the Caliph of Cordoba, Adbar Rahman III, wrote a letter to the king of the Khazars, Joseph ben Adon. Rumors about a great Jewish empire bordering on Eastern Europe had reached the Jewish elites at the continent's western end and aroused intense curiosity. Was there, at long last, a Jewish kingdom that was not subordinate to Muslim or Christian powers? The letter opens with a poem of praise for the king, with an acrostic composed by Menahem ben Saruk, Hasdai's secretary and the leading Hebrew poet in the Iberian Peninsula, followed by the writer's introduction of himself, inter alia, of course, as a descendant of the exiles from Jerusalem, and a description of the kingdom in which he lives. Then he comes to the point. Merchants have told me that there is a kingdom of Jews called Khazar, and I did not believe it, because I thought they said this to please and approach me. I was puzzled about it, until emissaries arrived from Constantinople with a gift from their king to our king, and I asked them about it. They assured me that this was the truth, that the kingdom is called Al-Khazar. You see that with the Al, before it was Khazar, Al-Khazar. And between Al-Constantinople and their country, there was a journey of 15 days by sea, but on land there are many nations between us, and the name of its king is Joseph. And I, when I heard this, was filled with force, and my hands grew strong, and my hope intensified, and I bowed and made obeisance to the Lord of heaven. I searched for a faithful emissary to send to your land to find out the truth and to greet my lord the king and his servants, our brothers. But it was difficult to do, for the distance is very great. Hasdai goes on to describe in detail all the difficulties entailed in dispatching the letter, and finally asks direct questions. Of what tribe is the king? What is the system of the monarchy? It is passed from father to son, as was done by the ancestors in the Torah. How big is the kingdom? How are its enemies? And over whom does it rule? Does war take precedence over the Sabbath? What is the country's climate? And so forth. Hasdai's curiosity has limitless, for which he apologized courteously. It is not known how long it took before the Khazar king's reply arrived, but in the extant letter, King Joseph answered Hasdai's questions as best he could. He described his origin and boundaries of his kingdom. So the king of the Khazar says, "You have asked of what nation and family and tribe we are. Know you that we are the sons of Japhet and his son Togarma." Do you guys hear that? That's the king of the Khazar saying he is descendant of Japhet from his son Togarma. It is said that in his time my ancestors were but a few, and the Lord granted them strength and boldness, and they fought with many great nations mightier than they were, and with God's help drove them out and inherited their country. Many generations passed until a king rose whose name was Bulan, a wise and God-fearing man who put all his trust in the Lord and removed all the sorcerers and idolaters from the country and lived under the Lord's wing. All right, so Bulan, we're going to read about him later on. This king summoned all his ministers and servants and told them all these things. They were content and accepted the king's judgment and entered under the wing of the Shekinah. Then rose a king of his offspring named Obadiah, a righteous and honest man, who reformed the kingdom and set the law in the proper order, and built synagogues and seminaries and brought in many of the sages of Israel. Writing in an epic and ornate style, the king describes the conversion to Judaism and lists the reasons that moved his ancestors to prefer the Jewish religion to the other two monotheistic faiths. In a tone suffused with fervent belief in the Torah and the commandments, he goes on to describe the location of his kingdom, its size, its population, and the power of his enemies and rivals, the Russians and the Ishmaelites. Various literary embellishments of and additions to the old text led some scholars to conclude that these letters, especially the king's reply, were not written in the 10th century. It might be forgeries or emendations by Muslim authors. There are two versions of Joseph's letter, a long one and a short one, but certain terms in the short version do not belong in the Arabic lexicon, and its original author was not part of the Muslim cultural world. Moreover, the distinctive linguistic use of the biblical Hebrew reversing connection, Vav Ha He Puk, indicates that Hasdai's letter and the king's reply were not written by one hand. The letter of the Khazar king was probably copied and embellished many times, but its core information seems fairly trustworthy as it accords with contemporary Arab testimonies and so cannot be dismissed as merely a literacy creation. In any event, there is evidence from the late 11th century that despite the difficulties of international communications, copies of both letters in several versions were found throughout the Jewish intellectual world. For example, Rabbi Jehuda al-Barceloni, who questioned the accuracy of these copies, commented, "We have seen some versions of the letter written by Joseph, the king, son of Aaron the Khazar priest, to Rabbi Hasdai, son of Yitzchak, and did not know if it was true or not." Finally, though, this sharp scholar who detested fables became convinced, and he admitted as much, that Chazars proselytized and had proselyte kings. "I have heard that all this is written in the books of Ishmaelites who were living then and wrote about it in their books." He therefore copied the letter of King Joseph and quoted a part of it in his own work. It is almost certain that the 12th century Rabbi Jehuda Halevi was familiar with the correspondence. He ascribed the conversion to Judaism by the Khazar monarch to a three-sided monotheistic brainstorming session. Its depiction in the opening of his work, the Kusari, is adapted from King Joseph's letter with some changes in style and detail. It should be noted that Rabbi Abraham ben David, who was several decades younger than Jehuda Halevi and was one of the fathers of Kabbalah and province, wrote of Eastern Europe. There were Khazar peoples who proselytized, and their king Joseph sent a letter to the president, Rabbi Hasdai, son of Yitzchak ben Shaprut, to tell him that he followed the rabbinate and so did all his people. He goes on to say that when in Toledo, he met Jewish students who told him that they were Chazars and faithful to rabbinical Judaism, whereas the histories of the Judaized Himyarites and Berbers were all but erased from the general consciousness, right? So right before this part of the book, he goes on to prove, and a lot of converts with the Berbers as well, and a lot of North Africans into Judaism. They weren't, but they took on the religion as well. So what he's saying here is that after this happened, they got erased from the general consciousness, these Berber Jews, Judaized Berbers or Himyarites. It was more difficult to leave blank pages in the case of the Chazars. In the first place, the secular modern public knew about the Kusari, the theological treatise completed in 1140 CE by Jehuda Halevi, a highly respected figure in Jewish tradition and a canonical one in Zionist culture because of its particular association with the Holy Land. Second, there was a mass of historical evidence about the Khazar kingdom from Arabic, Persian, Byzantine, Russian, Armenian, Hebrew, and even Chinese sources. They all agree that it was very powerful, and many of the sources also referred to its unexpected conversion to Judaism. They converted. Furthermore, the historical standing of this kingdom and the events that followed its breakup had been echoed in the earliest Jewish historiography in Eastern Europe, which battled with this issue for decades. Even Zionist reconstructors of the past hesitated for a long time to tackle the subject, and few of them attempted to research it with appropriate thoroughness. But the widespread interest in the Khazar kingdom eventually began to shrink, and it all but evaporated with the rise of the memory establishment in Israel after some 10 years of existence. Although the medieval kingdom of the Khazars existed in distant obscurity, and no gifted theologians had praised and immortalized it as the biblical authors had done in their time and place, it is, however, attested by external sources far more varied and abundant than exist about the kingdom of David and Solomon, the land of Prester John, the kingdom of Prester John. Jewish Khazaria was, of course, immeasurably bigger than any historical kingdom in the land of Judah. It was also more powerful than Himyar, or the desert realm of Din Hia al-Kahina. The story of the Khazars is fascinating. It begins in the 4th century, when some nomadic tribes accompanied the Huns as they surged westward. All right, listen, it continues with the rise of a great empire in the steppes along the Volga River in the northern Caucasus, and ends with the Mongol invasion in the 13th century, which wiped out all traces of this extraordinary kingdom. The Mongol invasion, The Khazars were a coalition of a strong Turkic or Hunnic Bulgar clans. All right, these are your Khazars, who, as they began to settle down, mingled with the Scythians. They mingled with who? The sons of Isaac? The Scythians, Is that how they ended up being so-called Jews, who had inhabited these mountains and steppes between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, which was known for a long time as the Khazar Sea? All right, that's a deep one right there. All right, when we have more understanding, right? Who are the Scythians? Remember, the Scythians were the Sakai. The Sakai became the Scythians. Eventually, the Scythians became the Saxons. So the Khazars, these Turkic and Hunnic Bulgar clans, ended up in the areas where the Scythians were. At its peak, the kingdom encompassed an assortment of tribes and linguistic groups: Alans and Bulgars, Magyars and Slavs, the Magyars language, linking it up with the ancient America. Remember that. The Khazars collected taxes from them all and ruled over a vast landmass, stretching from Kiev in the northwest to the Crimean Peninsula in the south, and from the upper Volga to present-day Georgia. From the 6th century on, Persian testimonies followed by Muslim ones shed light on the early stages of the Khazar saga. They invaded the Sassanid kingdom and harassed its border inhabitants. They got as far as the area around Mosul in today's Iraq. In the early 7th century, during the reign of the Persian king Khosrau II, a marriage with the Khazar king's daughter sealed an alliance that enabled the Persians to build fortifications in the passes of the Caucasus Mountains. Remains of these fortifications against Khazar invasions can still be seen. Armenian and Byzantine sources reveal that in the following years, the Khazar kingdom formed an alliance with the Eastern Roman Empire. They did what? Listen to this. This is a major drop right here. The Khazar kingdom formed an alliance with the Eastern Roman Empire in its struggle against the Persians, and became a significant factor in the regional balance of power. The 7th century Armenian bishop Sabaeus wrote in his history of Heraclius, they, Armenian nobles, went to serve the great Kagan, king of the northern lands. At the command of their king, the Kagan, they marched through the Jor Pass to come to the aid of the king of Greece. The Kagan, this being the title of the ruler of Khazaria, maintained extensive relations with the Byzantine Empire. The future emperor, Justinian II, who had been exiled to the Crimea, escaped at the end of the 7th century to the Khazar kingdom, where he married a Khazar princess. She was rebaptized as Theodora and would later be a powerful empress. Nor was this the only marital tie between the realms. In the 10th century, the ruler and author Constantine VII Porphyrogenitus wrote that Emperor Leo III allied himself by marriage with the Khagan of Khazaria, keeping his daughter as wife for his son Constantine V, shaming the Byzantine Empire and himself because he thereby abandoned the precepts of the forefathers and treated them with disdain. This non-traditional interdynastic match took place in 732 AD, and the son born of it became the emperor, who was known as Leo the Khazar. This was also the zenith of the diplomatic relations between two mighty kingdoms. The Khazars succeeded in the course of many battles to halt the Muslims' northward sweep and temporarily save the Byzantine Empire from a menacing encirclement that would have precipitated its collapse. The many battles between the Muslims and the Khazars were described by numerous Arab chroniclers who had no qualms about copying each other's work. Ibn al-Athir wrote that they fought very fiercely and both sides held out. Then the Khazars and the Turks overcame the Muslims. After al-Jarrah fell on the battlefield, the Khazars coveted the country and penetrated far into it, reaching Mosul. This was in 730 AD, but the response was not long in coming. After a tremendous logistical effort and more battles, the Arab armies managed to repel the determined enemy. The commander, who would later be the Caliph Marwan II, even led strong forces into Khazaria itself, and his condition for withdrawal was the conversion of the Khagan to Islam. You hear that? The Khazar sovereign accepted, and the Arab armies retreated to the Caucasus, so they made them convert to being Muslims. But do you see, there's a long history of these Khazars in war with Muslims, right? Do you guys see how far back this goes? So again, these Arab armies retreated to the Caucasus Mountains, which was agreed as the final boundary between Khazaria and the Muslim world. As we shall see, the temporary conversion of the pagan Khazar kingdom was not very meaningful, though many of its subjects accepted the faith of Muhammad. So you see, these Khazar people are just converting either by force or by choice, but they converting, right? Most sources depict the Khazar kingdom as having a highly original dual government, a supreme holy leader, as well as an active secular leader, Ahmad ibn Fadlan, a diplomat and author who was sent by the Caliph al-Muqtadir in 921 CE to the Bulgar country by the Volga, crossed Khazaria, and described it in his rare travel notes on the Khazars and their political system. He wrote, "As for the king of the Khazars, known as Khagan, he is seen only once in 4 months, and at a respectful distance. He is called the Great Khagan, and his deputy is called Khagan Bey." All right, Bey. It is later who commands the armies, administers the kingdom, and looks after it. He sallies and raids, and the kings of the vicinity surrender to him. He goes every day to see the great Khagan in a deferential manner, showing himself humble and modest. More information is found in the works of the geographer and chronicler al-Istakri, writing in about 932. His description is livelier and more picturesque. As for their regime and government, their master is called Khagan Khazar, who is more exalted than the king of the Khazars, though it is the king who empowers him. When they want to empower a Khagan, they throttle him with a silk cord, and when he has almost suffocated, they ask him, "For how long do you wish to reign?" And he replies, "So many years. If he dies before that time, it is well. Otherwise, he is put to death at that time." Only the sons of well-known families may fill the post of Khagan, and he has no real power, but is worshipped and adored when the people appear before him. Yet no one enters his presence except a small number, such as the king and those of his rank, and no one is appointed Khagan except those who clave to Judaism. Okay? Other Arabic sources corroborate the existence of a dual power system in Khazaria. This was an efficient regime It maintained a mystique around the great Khagan and utilized the most gifted and competent prince as the Bey, who functioned as a military viceroy. We're talking about Khazarians using, the Bey, the halo of sanctity that hung over the Khagan did not stop him from maintaining a harem of 25 women and 60 concubines, though this was not necessarily a devout emulation of the biblical King Solomon. All right, remember King Solomon had about 70 wives and about, 300 concubines? Yeah. So when you're talking about the line of David, what you're really talking about, it's big. All right, so a little more ahead says, so we know that the Khazars were typical rice growers and regular consumers of fish and wine, though bulk of the kingdom's income came from tolls. Khazaria straddled the Silk Road and also dominated the Volga and the Don rivers, which were major transportation routes. A further source of income was the heavy tax imposed on the numerous tribes governed by the kingdom. The Khazars were known for their flourishing trade, especially in furs and slaves, and their growing wealth enabled them to maintain a strong and well-trained military force that dominated all of southern Russia and today's eastern Ukraine. All right, the Khazars were where? Pay attention to that. Thus far, the descriptions of the Arab chroniclers coincide and even accord with the testimony of King Joseph's letter. The question of the Khazar language, however, is obscure. No doubt the great mixture of tribes and populations spoke various languages and dialects, but what was the language of the Khazar power elite? Al-Isakri, following Al-Bakri, wrote, the language of the Khazars differs from that of the Turks and the Persian language, and does not resemble the language of any other nation. Nevertheless, most researchers assume that the spoken Khazar language consisted of Hunnic, Bulgarian dialects, with others from the Turkic family, Japhet languages. There is no doubt, however, that the Khazars' sacred tongue in written communication was Hebrew. The few extant Khazar documents indicate as much, and the Arab writer Al-Nadim, who lived in Baghdad in the 10th century, confirms it. As for the Turks and the Khazars, they have no script of their own, and the Khazars write in Hebrew. Inscriptions have been found in Crimea that are in a non-Semitic language written in Hebrew characters. Two of these characters, Shin and Sadiq, eventually entered the Cyrillic alphabet, presumably in the course of the Khazars' early rule over the Russians. Why did the Khazar kingdom not adopt the Greek or Arabic language for religious usage and high-level communication? Why did the Khazars become Jews when all their neighbors converted en masse either to Christianity or to Islam? And another question, when did amazing collective proselytizing begin? All right, we continue in the book, The Invention of the Jewish People. We're in this part of the book. Still, we're talking about the Khazars. So it says here, Khazars and Judaism, a long love affair? One of the few surviving testimonies left by the Khazars themselves is the important document known to scholars as the Cambridge document. Its originality is less disputed than that of King Joseph's letter. This Hebrew manuscript, written by Jewish Khazar from the court of King Joseph, was found in the famous Cairo Genesa, published in 1912, and has since been kept at the Cambridge University Library. Little is known about the writer or the addressee, but it appears to have been written in the 10th century and may have been another reply to Hasdai's request. The text is fragmented and many words are missing, but it is still a rich source of information. After a few missing lines, the letter reads as follows: Armenia and our ancestors fled from them, for they could not bear the joke of the worshippers of idols, and the princes of Khazaria received them, for the men of Khazaria were first without the Torah. Oh, they didn't have the Torah at first, and they too remained without Torah and scriptures, and made marriage with the inhabitants of the land, and mingled with them, mingled with so many different peoples, and they learned their deeds and went out with them to the war continually, and they became one people. That's what they did. A bunch of people mixed together. Only upon the covenant of circumcision they relied, and some of them observed the Sabbath. Remember, the Scythians were there. When they're saying some of them and some of them are circumcised, remember the Scythians were there. Who's the Scythians? Sakai, Scythians, Saxons, sons of Isaac. And there were no king in the land of Khazaria. Only him who won victories in the battle, they would appoint over them as general of the army. Now it happened at one time when the Jews went forth into the battle with them, as was their wont, that on that day a Jew proved mighty with his sword and put to flight the enemies who came against Khazar. Then the people of Khazar appointed him over them as a general of the army, in accordance with their ancient custom. Do you guys see? The document also describes a tripartite brainstorming encounter between a Muslim, a Christian, and a Jew, similar in essentials of the description in King Joseph's letter, and concluded, of course, with the appropriate decision in favor of Judaism. It seems that this literary historical model was very popular in that period, because early Russian chronicles describe the conversion of Vladimir I of Kiev to Christianity in almost the same manner, though naturally with a different outcome. A contemporary Arab writer also describes the Judaization of the king of Khazar following an intense theological debate, except that in his text the Jewish scholar hired an assassin to poison the Muslim scholar before the decisive confrontation, and in that way the Jew turned the king to his religion and converted him. The rest of the so-called Cambridge document, like its opening, suggests an interesting hypothesis concerning the Judaization of the Chazars. Israel, together with the men of Khazar, returned in perfect repentance, but also the Jews began to come from Baghdad, from Khorasan, and from the land of Greece, and strengthened the hands of men of the land. Remember, Jews meant Judean, or people from the tribe of Judah. So it says they were there, these Jews, to strengthen the hands of the men of the land and encourage themselves in the covenant of the father of the multitude, Abraham. And the men of the land appointed over them one of the wise men as judge, and they call his name in the tongue of Khazar, Kagan. Therefore the judges who arose after him are called by the name Kagan, even unto this day. As to the great prince of Khazar, they turned his name into Sabriel, and thus made him king over them. All right, guys, I actually get it. They literally, this Kagan was probably one of the bloodlines of the Israelites, a true bloodline. That's why he was like a priest, like somebody they worshiped, even though they still had a king. The Khazarians kept their power, but they had like this priestly kind figure, the Kagan. And as it's telling you here, guys, it is one of these people, these so-called Jews of the line of Abraham, that they're actually appointed as Kagans. That's deep right there. And again, he's a judge like a Danite. Therefore, the judges who arose after him are called by the name Kagan, even unto this day. As to the great prince of Khazar, they turned his name into Sabriel, and thus made him king over them. Continue, says, it may be that this Sabriel was the post-conversion name of King Bulan, mentioned in Joseph's letter, and this story may well be unreliable, and the dramatic descriptions of the Judaization merely fables and sermons. However, stories about migration as the catalyst in the process of proselytization seem much more relevant to understanding Khazar history. The arrival of Jewish believers from Armenia, from today's Iraq, from Khorasan, which covered parts of modern-day Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, and from Byzantium, may well have triggered the conversion of that strange kingdom to Judaism. Proselytizing Jews were driven from the arena of rival monotheisms, Christianity or Islam, to the lands of paganism. As in other regions that witnessed mass Judaization, so in Khazar, all right, just like in Khazar, it began with immigrants who convinced the pagans that their faith was preferable. The pagans, these are pagan people converting, and now they're Jews. Come on. The great mass proselytizing campaign that began in the 2nd century BC with the rise of the Hasmonean kingdom reached its climax in Khazar in the 8th century AD. Hasmonean, all right, these Hellenized, Romanized Jews. The Khazar Hebrew testimony about Jewish immigration finds support in Arabic literature. The Arab chronicler Al-Mawizdi wrote, as for the Jews, they are the king and his court, and the Khazars his people. The Judaization of the king of the Khazars took place in the caliphate of Harun al-Rashid. Many Jews who had heard of it joined him from all the Muslim cities and from Byzantium. The reason being that Byzantine king in our time, the year 332 or 944 AD, Armanus Romanus forcibly Christianized the Jews in his kingdom, upon which many Jews fled from Byzantium to the land of the Khazars. Jehuda Halevi noted in the Kusari that the Khazars converted in 740 AD, but the date may not be correct. A Christian document written circa 864 AD in distant western France stated that all the Khazari obeyed the precepts of Judaism. At some stage between the mid-8th and mid-9th centuries, the Khazars adopted Jewish monotheism as their particular faith and rite. It is also reasonable to assume that this was not a miraculous single act, but a long process. Even King Joseph's questionable letter describes the conversion as occurring in stages. King Bulan was persuaded by the logic of the law of Moses and became a Jew, but only King Obadiah, his grandson or great-grandson, reformed the kingdom and set the law in the proper order, built synagogues and seminaries, and adopted the Mishnah and Talmud. It is also said that he invited Jewish sages from far away to bolster the true faith among his subjects. In the 19th century, scholars were doubtful about the conversion of the Khazar kingdom. Today, it is not in dispute, okay? Today, guys, this is facts. They converted the Khazars. The spreading monotheism reached the Caucasus and the steppes of the Volga and Don, today's southern Russia, and convinced rulers and tribal elites to believe in the many advantages of a single deity. The question remains, why did Khazaria opt for Judaism rather than the other monotheistic religions with their less onerous requirements? If we set aside the magical sermon included in King Joseph's letter, the Cambridge document, and Jehuda Halevi's book, we are left with the same explanation that accounted for Himyar's conversion, the desire to remain independent in the face of mighty grasping empires, in this case the Orthodox Byzantine Empire and the Abbasid Muslim Caliphate, impelled the rulers of Khazaria to adopt Judaism as a defensive ideological weapon. Had the Khazars adopted Islam, for example, they would have become the subjects of the Caliph. Had they remained pagan, they would have been marked for annihilation by the Muslims, who did not tolerate idolatry. Christianity, of course, would have subordinated them to the Eastern Empire for a long time. The slow and gradual transition from the ancient shamanism of the region to Jewish monotheism probably also contributed to the consolidation and centralization of the Khazar realm. All right, so for them it was convenience. They rather accept the Jewish faith and be under that, so they can rule themselves. A little further ahead it says here, proselytes have always striven to find some direct genealogical link to the patriarchs of biblical mythology, and this tendency affected many of the Khazars, who wanted to believe that they were descended from the Israelite tribes. They wanted to believe it so bad. The religious consciousness grew more decisive in the next generation, and in time it overcame the former tribal identities associated with idolatry. The pagan cults became abominable in the eyes of the proud new monotheists, and even more so for their offspring and their imagined identity. Imagined identity, Tama the Khazars. The kingdom therefore saw itself as more Jewish than Khazar, and so it was documented in the contemporary Russian epics. It was not the land of the Khazars, but the land of the Jews, huh? All of a sudden, everybody's a Jew, so-called Jew. Another early source attesting to the collective conversion of the Khazars is a Karaite one. In about 973 AD, one Jakov Kisani, a scholarly traveler who was quite familiar with the regions around Khazaria, wrote a commentary in Aramaic on the verse, God shall enlarge Japhet. God shall enlarge Japhet, all right? This deep. This is what the words mean. He will dwell in the tents of Shem, which grant him a favor and advantage. You see, so the Kagan was, these people with Israelite blood was actually the ones helping them convert, enlarging them, right? Enlarging their heritage, their kingdom, their tents. And they will have favor and advantage because of that. All right, that's deep. And some commentators think that this refers to the Khazars who became so-called Jews. This Karaite testimony is not the only one confirming that the Judaization was not merely an Oriental fantasy of Arab scholars. In addition to Hasdai ibn Shabruk request and the statement of Rabat, the great Rabbi Sadia Gaon, who lived in Baghdad for several years in the 10th century, also wrote about the Khazars. We saw in the previous chapter that he lamented the Islamization of Jews in the Holy Land. Did he rejoice in the Judaization of a whole kingdom by way of replacement? He may well have been dubious about these new Jews who showed up far north of Babylon, these believers in the law of Moses, who were also tough warriors, riders of horses, periodic executioners of their own kings, and very active slave traders. Okay? The worry that these wild Jews did not accept the full burden of the Torah and all the precepts of the Talmud may well have dismayed the Karaites, severest ideological opponent. In his writing, he referred to the Judaization of the Khazars in a matter-of-fact way, mentioned the Kagan once, and also described a Jew named Jishat bar Abraham, who journeyed to the Khazars' land and settled there. All right, going to go a little further in the book. It's going to tell us here that, I skipped a lot, guys, but it was basically saying how, Soviet Union history and Israeli history try to downplay, the Khazar research, the history of the Khazars, because they don't want you to know about that too much. It says here, but whereas in Israel and the Soviet Union, the two states to which the Khazar past was most relevant, Khazaria research was treated for many years as taboo. Fresh materials were emerging in the West. In 1954, a thorough and comprehensive study of Jewish Khazaria by a British scholar named Douglas Dunlop was published by Princeton University Press. Dunlop showed a thorough familiarity with the Arabic literature on the subject and great caution on the fate of the Khazars after the fall of their empire. In 1970, Peter Golden submitted a vast doctoral dissertation entitled The Khazars, Their History and Language as Reflected in the Islamic, Byzantine, Caucasian, Hebrew, and Old Russian Sources. Parts of this scholarly work were published in 1980. In 1976, Arthur Koestler dropped a literary bombshell entitled The 13th Tribe. All right, guys, we're going to get into that book again today, just for the new people, which was translated into many languages and provoked a variety of reactions. In 1982, the book by Norman Golb and Omeljan Priksan, Khazarian Hebrew documents of the 10th century, laid the critical foundations for the subject. The popular work by Kevin A. Brooke, The Jews of Khazaria, appeared in 1999. This non-academic writer also started an extensive website dedicated to the subject of Khazaria. Other works appeared in Spanish, French, and German, and in recent years, many of the books mentioned have been translated into Russian, Turkish, and Persian. None of them appeared in Hebrew, except Koestler's 13th Tribe, which was issued in Jerusalem by a private publisher who did not risk distributing it to the bookshops. Over the years, there has been dozens of essays, articles, and chapters in history books devoted to the history of the Khazars and its connection to Jewish history. There was even a scientific conference in Jerusalem in 1999, attended mainly by outside scholars. The event attracted little interest in local academic circles, although the ideological pressure of the late 1980s and 1990s has eased somewhat. Israeli historians have not taken up the subject of Khazaria, okay? They haven't taken it on, nor have they directed their students to these blocked historical paths. But while the Khazars scared off the Israeli historians, not one of whom has published a single paper on the subject, Koestler's 13th Tribe annoyed them and provoked angry responses. Hebrew readers had no access to the book itself. For many years, learning about it only through the venomous denunciations, all right? They didn't even let their own people read this, okay? They didn't want them to know. Again, this was the book, The Invention of the Jewish People. This is the back cover of the book, all right? And it says here in the praise, it says, Israel's Declaration of Independence states that the Jewish people arose in the land of Israel and was exiled from its homeland. Every Israelite schoolchild is taught that this happened during the period of the Roman rule. In 70 CE, the nation remained loyal to its land, to which it began to return after 2 millennia of exile. Wrong, says the historian Shlomo Sand, and one of the most fascinating and challenging books published here in a long time. There was never a Jewish people, only a Jewish religion, and the exile also never happened. Hence, there was no return. Tom Segeth. All right, so I just want to read that. This is not me saying it. Again, this is people telling you this is history.
Hello, this is Pastor Stephen Anderson from Faithful Word Baptist Church in Tempe, Arizona. Today I want to talk about Genesis chapter 10, verses 2 through 5, where the Bible reads, "The sons of Japheth, Gomer and Magog and Madai and Javan and Tubal and Meshach and Tiras, and the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz and Riphath and Togarmah, and the sons of Javan, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, everyone after his tongue, after their families, in their nations." Now, the reason that I read those scriptures to you is that they clearly state that Ashkenaz is one of the Gentile nations. Now, 80 to 85% of today's so-called Jewry, those who claim to be Jews in the world today, 80 to 85% of them are what is known as Ashkenazi Jews. And an Ashkenazi Jew is so named because he primarily descends from this guy in the Bible named Ashkenaz, which is clearly listed as one of the Gentile nations. Now, the reason for this is that there was a nation of people who were of Japheth, who were Europeans, white people, known as the Chazars. And in the 8th century after Christ, the whole nation of the Chazars turned unto Judaism. They converted to the religion of Judaism. And for a few hundred years, the empire of the Khazars was a power in Eastern Europe, and they followed the religion of Judaism. But eventually they were defeated by the Russians, and they were scattered into Eastern Europe. And so a lot of the Eastern European Jews today are the descendants of the Khazars. And in fact, DNA testing has even confirmed that the Ashkenazi Jews have about 80% of their genetics and 80% of their ancestry from Europeans. So today's so-called Jews, the Ashkenazis, which again, like I said, is 80 to 85% of so-called Jews in the world today, and it is the primary type of Jew that immigrated into the nation of Israel and Palestine. And it is also the primary type of Jew that is living in the United States today, by far. So these Ashkenazi Jews, according to the Bible, are actually Gentiles. And I'm not the one calling them Ashkenazi Jews. They'll even call themselves Ashkenazi Jews. You could even just go to Wikipedia and just type in Ashkenazi Jews, and it will explain these things to you. You can talk to a rabbi, and you can talk to whoever you want, and you'll find out that these Ashkenazi Jews are the descendants of converts. A lot of Christian Zionists today, they claim that these Jews are God's chosen people because of the fact that they descend from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But in reality, they don't descend from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob any more than you or I do. Okay? They have some blood mixed in from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob from intermarrying with other Jews, but so do the rest of us Europeans. Primarily, they are white Europeans. They are not Middle Eastern Jews. And that's why when you look at those in Hollywood today that are so-called Jews, they don't look like Middle Eastern people. They look like white people because they are the descendants of white converts to Judaism, Caucasian converts, Chazars. That's why they're called Ashkenazi, because they're of Japheth. They're primarily descended from the Gentiles.
But it says here in this website, it's called thescientist.com, exploring life, inspiring innovation. And it says here, genetic roots of the Ashkenazi Jews. Most Ashkenazi Jews, traditionally believed to have descended from the ancient tribes of Israel, may in fact be maternally descended from prehistoric Europeans. All right, they're actually Europeans. The majority of Ashkenazi Jews are descended from the prehistoric European women, according to a study published Tuesday, October 8th in Nature Communications. While the Jewish religion began in the Near East and the Ashkenazi Jews were believed to have origins in the early indigenous tribes of this region, new evidence from mitochondrial DNA, which is passed on exclusively from mother to child, suggests that female ancestors of most modern Ashkenazi Jews converted to Judaism in the North Mediterranean around 2000 years ago, and later in West and Central Europe. All right. Again, what? Converted. So I went this other website says Frontiers in Genetics, the Origins of Ashkenazi Jews and Yiddish. All right, and right here it says historical meaning of Ashkenaz says Ashkenaz is one of the most disputed biblical place names. It appears in the Hebrew Bible as the name of one of Noah's descendants. All right, that's what the guy was talking about earlier through Japhet, right? One of his sons. As a reference to the kingdom of Ashkenaz, prophesied to be called together with Ararat and Minai to wage war against Babylon. Jeremiah 51:27, in addition to tracing Ashkenazi Jews to the ancient Iranian lands of Ashkenaz and uncovering the villages whose names may derive from Ashkenaz, the partial Iranian origin of Ashkenazi Jews inferred by Das et al. In 2006 was further supported by genetic similarity of Ashkenazi Jews to Sephardic Mountain Jews and Iranian Jews, as well as their similarity to Near Eastern populations and simulated native Turkish and Caucasus populations, the Khazars, right? There are good grounds, therefore, for inferring that Jews who consider themselves Ashkenazic adopted this name and spoke of their lands as Ashkenaz, since they perceived themselves as Iranian origin, that we find varied evidence of the knowledge of Iranian language among Moroccan and Andalusian Jews and Karaites. You hear this? It's a big confederacy here. Andalusians, what are you talking about? Huh? Thought that was a Moorish town. Alright? Karaites. And to the 11th century's compelling point of reference to assess the shared Iranian origins of Sephardic and Ashkenazic Jews. Moreover, Iranian-speaking Jews in the Caucasus, the so-called Juhudis, and Turkic-speaking Jews in the Crimea prior to World War II called themselves Ashkenazism. Nazism. The Rhineland hypothesis cannot explain why a name that denotes Scythians and was associated with the Near East becomes associated with German lands in the 11th to 13th century. Uproot suggested that Jewish immigrants in Europe transferred biblical names onto the regions in which they settled. This is unconvincing. Biblical names were used as place names only when they had similar sound. Not only Germany and Ashkenaz do not share similar sounds, but Germany was already named Germana or Germanja in the Iranian Babylonian Talmud, completed in the 5th century AD, and not surprisingly was associated with Noah's grandson Gomer. Talmud Joma, alright? Noah's grandson Gomer from Gomer. Alright, you hear this? That's Japhet again. Alright, Talmud Joma. Continues as the genetic structure of Ashkenazic Jews. Ashkenazic Jews were localized to modern-day Turkey and found to be genetically closest to Turkic, Southern Caucasian, and Iranian populations, suggesting a common origin in Iranian Ashkenaz lands, descendants of Ashkenaz in the lands of Ashkenaz. These findings were more compatible with an Irano-Turco-Slavic origin for Ashkenazi Jews and a Slavic origin for Yiddish than with the Rhineland hypothesis. So this is the original. They say, oh, we were just German. You know, that's what it means. Ashkenaz means German. Right, but actually it's Turkic and, Caucasian, and, it has a lot of Slavic relations as well. All those areas up here in between, almost getting to the Middle East, but actually in Europe still. Eastern Europe, they call. The findings have also highlighted the strong social, cultural, and genetic bonds of Ashkenazic and Iranian Judaism and their shared Iranian origins. Alright, so now I'm in myjewishlearning.com. It says, who are the Ashkenazi Jews? The Ashkenazi Jews are the Jewish ethnic identity most readily recognized by North Americans. Alright, so most of the Jews in North America are what? Ashkenazi Jews. The culture of matzah balls, black-hatted Hasidim in Yiddish, the ethnicity originated in medieval Germany. Although strictly speaking, alright, so now this is what the story goes, right? That originated in Germany, but we just debunked that, right, through genetics. Although strictly speaking, Ashkenazism refers to Jews of Germany, the term has come to refer more broadly Jews from Central and Eastern Europe. Jews first reached the interior of Europe by following trade routes along waterways during the 8th and 9th centuries. Eventually, the vast majority of Ashkenazi Jews relocated to the Polish Commonwealth, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Ukraine, and Belarus. All right, we got that already too. where princes welcomed their skilled and educated workforce. The small pre-existing Polish Jewish communities' customs were displaced by the Ashkenazic prayer, order, customs, and Yiddish language. All right. We're in the Encyclopedia Britannica. We're telling us that the Ashkenazi people, says today, Ashkenazism constitute more than 80% of all Jews in the world, vastly outnumbering Sephardic Jews. In the early 21st century, Ashkenazic Jews numbered about 11 million. In Israel, the numbers of Ashkenazism and Sephardim are roughly equal, and the chief rabbinate has both as Ashkenazic and a Sephardic chief rabbi on equal footing. All Reform and conservative Jewish congregations belong to the Ashkenazic tradition. All right. I'm in the Sundervan Pictorial Bible Dictionary by Merrill C. Tini. All right, this is the official one in the 60s. All right, we're going to go to page 76. Around page 76, let me see. All right, so actually page 77 of this book, and it says Ashkenaz, right? Ashkenaz, great-grandson of Noah through Japhet and Gomer, all right? And this is the Bible verses. It says a tribe or nation mentioned once in Jeremiah 51:27, associated with the Ararat and Mini as an instrument of wrath in the hands of God against Babylon. They fought for the Most High, you know. And so again, a tribe or a nation, a nation. He has a nation, Ashkenaz. All right, he had a nation. Where's their descendants? And we're under Japhet now. All right, it says God will enlarge. That's what it means. It says a son of Noah. He was older than Shem, but comes third in some list of the three sons. Shem, however, is usually named first. Japhet and his wife were saved in the ark. He aided Shem in covering the naked body of their drunken father. He is the progenitor of the more remote northern peoples of southeastern Europe. All right, ancestor what? Of who? Southeastern Europe's, right? Ashkenazi Jews, these Khazars, all these Turks, right? Mongols. That he was to occupy the tents of Shem is thought to refer to conquest of the Greeks, who were descendants of Japhet. All right, the Greeks are descendants of Japhet. All right, Greeks, the Greeks are black, right? We saw Medicine Man's video. The ancient Greeks were black. All right, so even Japhet was black. It wasn't always about white. All right, this he did during the days of Assyrian power. He had 7 sons, whose descendants occupied the isles of the Gentiles, Hellenes or Greeks, an area including Asia Minor and Upper Greece. All right, that's Japhet right there. Called the Student's Manual of Oriental History, a manual of the ancient history of the East to the commencement of the Median Wars by François Lenormand, librarian of the Institut de France, and E. Chevalier, member of the Royal Asiatic Society of London. Volume 1, comprising the history of the Israelites, Egyptians, Assyrians, and Babylonians. New edition. All right. And again, ancient history of the East. All right. Royal Asiatic Society. These are scholars. These are not people being religious, just religious. They understand that a lot of that history in the scriptures is actual history. It's put in there maybe allegorically sometimes or as a story, but there's actual truth behind it, that we have to research on. So we're going to start on page 60 of this book, The Race of Japhet. The sustained topic, it says that the name of this youngest born of the sons of Noah signifies extension, because that his posterity was to occupy an immense extent of country. His family remained longest united and was the last to leave the neighborhood of the place where Noah had fixed his residence after the deluge. The book of Genesis gives the names of his 7 sons as Gomer, Magog, Madai, Tubal, Meshach, Tiras, and Javan. Gomer personifies the family originally established on the northern coast of the Euxine in the north of Greece. Remember, the Euxine is the Black Sea. Remember, they were saying that the Sumerians, and the Herodotus were saying the Sumerians were from the upper, right, northern part of the Euxine, same as Gomer and his people, as it says here, in north of Greece. but in reality they're from that whole area, Georgia and everything. So it says, from these were in due course of time to spring a people well known to the Greeks and Roman historians as Sumerians. All right, Sumerians, Kimbri or Kimri. All right, the Sumerians are from Gomer, Gamir, Gomer. Sumerians. We're talking about real people. All right, who were for ages the terror of Asia and Europe, and who even made Rome tremble at the summit of her power. Three sons of Gomer are mentioned: Ashkenaz, whose name seems composed of Gothic roots, as Kunis, a race of asses. Hey, I didn't say it, and which represents the Germanic and Scandinavian nations not yet separated and inhabiting a limited district to the northeast of the Black Sea. All right, Germanic and Scandinavian, the Germanic people, the Scandinavian people, Ashkenaz, who are all related to Gomer, Gomer's kids. All right, Sumerians, they're all the same. Ashkenaz, they're just cousins. Britpath as another son, that is the group of Celts or Gauls. All right, the Celts, the Celts, or the Gauls, the Galatians, the Gauls, then established, or the Franks, then established in the first European settlement on the Rifine mountain, the present Carpathians, before entering on their last migration towards the France of our days. I told you these are the Franks, the Gauls. And lastly, Tograma, in whom tradition has always recognized the Armenians. All right, these are the family or posterity of Gomer. I guess he's going to get into the Magog, his son, and who's his nations. It says this represents a group of nations more extensive than others, and a very peculiar physiognomy. We speak of Magog. This name is sacred scripture is almost always associated with Gog. The very frequent allusions in the Hebrew prophets to the incursions and ravages of the sons of Gog and Magog induce us to recognize them as the nomadic tribes of the northeast near the Caspian Sea. Their name has been compared to that of the Massagetha. The historian Josephus, the recorder of traditions of the Jewish nation, calls them Scythians, right? They're Scythians. Everything seems to prove that the inspired writer of the book of Genesis, under the name of Magog, intended to represent the numerous tribes composing the secondary race now designated by science Turanians, all right? By science, not just biblical scripture, by science. Same people. This race was one of the largest both numerically and with regard to the extent of territory which it occupies. Is divided into two great branches, the Ugro-Finnish and the Dravidian, the Finnish, Finland, right? Finnish, the Ugro-Finnish and the Dravidian. The first must be again subdivided into the Turkish, including the populations of Turkestan, right? Turkish people come out of this, and the steppes of Central Asia, as well as the Hungarians or the Huns, the Hungarians, right? Who have been for a long time settled in Europe, and the Uralo-Finnish group comprising the Finns, the Estonians, the Tushudis, and in general nearly all the tribes of the north of Europe and Asia. Again, all these cold places, right? All these descendants of Japhet, right? Japhet. The country of the Dravidian branch is on the contrary to the south. This branch is in fact composed of the indigenous people of the peninsula of Hindustan, Tamuls, Telingas, Karnats, who were subjugated by the Aryan race and who appear to have originally driven before them the Negroes of the Australian group, the original inhabitants of the soil, who are now represented by the almost savage tribe of the Cant. The Encyclopedia Metropolitana, or System of Universal Knowledge on a Methodical Plan, projected by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. All right, chronological tables from AM 1 to AD 1500. All right. Chronological tables comprehending the chronology and history of the world from the earliest records to the close of the Russian War. First division, ancient and medieval history from AM to 1500. All right, London and Glasgow is from 1857. All right, an encyclopedia, right? The sons of Japhet, Spain, France, Greece, Germany, Asia Minor, Circassia, and Europe in general. Continuing real quick in the book, Asia Minor starts talking about, the nations there. The people of Lesser Phrygia or Trojans were also without doubt a very ancient people, but of certain origin. Boschar supposed that Ashkenaz, the eldest son of Gomer, first settled this district. This is the northern and German nations. I skipped a lot, but I just want to show you things that relate to what we're talking about. It says, in this division of chronology, we have recorded the dates and the most remarkable of those barbaric inundations, which from the time swept over the fairest and most civilized portions of the east and west. Though the invading tribes were known by different names, yet as they all, or nearly all, proceeded from a common source, same people, same family, and as their historic importance taken singly extends over but a comparatively brief period, the necessity and propriety of including them under one general appellation and one chronological category will at once be evident. These barbaric tribes, remember Conan the Barbarian, these barbarous tribes, Barbary tribes were known as Scythians, Tartars, the Gati, the Masagati, the Sarmatians or Samaritans or Sarmatians, Cimmerians, all right, the Cimmerians, here we go, Teutones, Ubi, the Helvetians, the Gauls, the Goths, the Celts and the Huns, the Germans, Sclavonians, the Scandinavians, the Cherusci, the Chatti, the Alemanni, or the Heruli, the Burgundians, the Marcomanni, the Suavi, the Quadi, the Alani, the Hermunduri, the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, the Vandals, all right, etc. All right, all those people come from a common source. Remember, these are from Gomer. These are from Gomer, or my God, Gomer. All right, now I wanted to get into this book, and I thought it was a really good find. And it's called The Royal Genealogies of the Genealogical Tables of Emperors, Kings, and Princes from Adam to the times in two parts. Part one begins with the chronological history of the world, from the beginning of time to the Christian era, and then the genealogies of the earliest great families and most ancient sovereigns of Asia, Europe, Africa, and America down to Charlemagne, and many of them down to these times. Part 2 begins with the Grand Revolution of Charlemagne and carries on to the royal princely genealogies of Europe down to these times, concluding with those of the Britannic Isles. All right, this is by James Anderson, D.D. from London, printed by the author by James Benham. Now, very important, and what I want you to see is this, the year that this was printed. All right, it says, to the Most High Puzan and most illustrious prince, Frederick Louis, Prince of Great Britain. So this is written for this person, Prince of Wales, Prince of Stewart of Scotland, a Steward of Scotland, Duke of Cornwall, Rothesay, and Edinburgh. All right, so you get it. They're going to make sure they try to be as accurate as possible. They're tracing this person's genealogy, basically. And I know you think it's all biblical and religion, but we're not talking about that. All right? Book from 1632. All right? Written to that prince. It wasn't written for you. They didn't know eventually we were going to read this. But let's see what it says here. All right, so remember this book is written for the Prince of Britain. This is from 1632. All right, they ain't trying to be no agenda here, trying to be biblical. This is what they knew how to do. This is a very, in its time, a primary source. All right. So it says here, Table 2, the patriarchs after the flood of the line of Japhet. We're going to read a little bit about the descendants of Japhet and his line and the nations that came out of him. We're going to start out here with Gomer again. And now it says here, Gomer, from whom are descended the Cimbrians or Cimmerians. Here we go. We're going back to the people we've been studying, right? And the same book from 1632 letting us know that the Cimmerians, it is not no enigma. They're not a mystery. They come out of Gomer. All right, so the Cimbrians, Cimbri, it's like the Celts. We'll see that later, Danish. All right, from whom the descend Gomer, Cimmerians, the Phrygians, we saw the map earlier. Again, that's modern-day Turkey, the Phrygians and other nations of Lesser Asia, who sent their colonies afterwards into the north and west, from whom the Gauls, all right, the Gauls or the Franks come out of them, or some of the Gauls descend, for they were of various sorts. So the Gauls were mixed, though, not just Gomer. All right, so it says Magog, the father of the Getes and Massagetes, on the sides of the north Great Asia, from whom came the Asiatic Scythians at or near Mount Caucasus, or Caucasus, right? Or as in the Hebrew, Gog Halam or Haran, and from these came the European Scythians and the Goths. All right, so it says Ashkenaz, father of the Ashkanians, or first inhabitants of Pontus and Bithynia, toward the Oxian Sea or the Black Sea, and also of the country in and about the Ilium or Troy. The Black Sea is by Sony called Axiom from Ashkenaz. The German nation is supposed to spring from a colony of Ashkenaz, the Germans. Remember what modern day Jews, Ashkenaz, German, Ukrainian, Khazars, And what does it say here? So some of these are names in the dual or plural number, which are supposed to therefore to be rather the names of nations than of particular men. All right, so you don't want to see it like that, like, oh, everybody came out of 3 people. Well, they're probably representing nations, not just one person. All right, letting you know here. But that hinders not there being descendants from Japhet. So even though at some point they still came out of Japhet, or this person who, originally, there is a beginning to everything, all right? And by these were the isles of the Gentiles. These are the Gentiles. These are the islands of the Gentiles, or the Europeans. Remember, this book is from 1632. They're letting you know, right, where these nations are from. It says here, the most ancient kings of Germans. It says Noah, Japhet. See how it starts? Noah, Japhet. It says Gomer, from whom came those Germans called Combri or Cimbri, right? This is the same as Cimmerian, Cimbri, right? Ashkenaz or Ashkanese, called by Aventinus Tuisco, the giant, and by others Luiso, whom Aventinus makes fourth son of Noah, the fourth son of Noah, and that he was born after the flood, but without authority, was sent by Noah into Europe after the flood 131 years and 20 captains, and made a settlement near the Tanais on the west coast of the Oxen Sea, that's the Black Sea, by some called Ashken, from him, right? Ashkenaz, that's where he settled, and there founded the kingdom of the Germans and Sarmatans or Sarmatians, Samaritans. But by computing the years of the reigns of these kings to the death of Wolfram Stigmander, the 20th king, says here when Ashkenaz himself was above 24 years old, where he lived above 200 years and reigned, right? It says there. In the vocables of Saxony and Hessia, there are some vestiges of the name Ashkenaz, and from him the Jews called the Germans Ashkenaz. But in Saxonic and Italian, they are called Luisones or Tuisones, from Tuisco, his other name, all right? In the 25th year of the reign, he partitioned his kingdom into triparchies and governments, and brought colonies from diverse parts to increase it. He built the city Duisburg, made a body of laws in Verdi, and invented letters, which Cadmus afterwards imitated, for the Greeks and High Dutch are much like in many words. All right, they're talking about Ashkenaz, a son of Gomer. All right, these are the people the Germans came from, or the Combri, Cimbri, the Cimmerians. All right, it's the same thing. We'll see that later. It says Ashkenaz had a brother called Sitta, say the Germans, the father of the Scythians, for which the Germans have been of old called Scythians too, very justly, because they came mostly from old Scythia. And Germany had several ancient names, for that part next to the Euxine, thus the Black Sea, was called Scythia, and the country of the Getes, but the parts east of the Vistula or Wesel were called Samartia, Europe, and westward it was called Gallia. Celtica, all right, Celts, the Gauls, Gallians, Galatians, Alemania, Aleman, the Germans, in Spanish you say Aleman, Francia, or the Franks, and Teutonia. For old Germany comprehended the far greater part of Europe, and those called Gauls were all old Germans, all right, who by ancient authors are called Celts, Gauls, and Galatians, all right, which is confirmed by the historian Strabo and Aventinus, and by Aestedius in his chronology, page 201. Or it says Ashkenaz or Tuisco, after his death, was worshipped as the ambassador and interpreter of the gods, and from thence called the first Germans Mercury, from Twishton to interpret Mercury. Mercury, who's Mercury? That's Hermes, aka Thoth. All right, so it gets pretty detailed on the German people and the nations that came out of these main, Gauls, Ashkenaz, you know, Scythians. So it goes very deep. You see, as you can see here. Continue. Look at the table; it's really long. All right, we're in this book now. Let me just zoom in. It says the Khazars in Annotated Bibliography by Bernard D. Wainwright. This is in Studies in Bibliography and Book Lore, Volume 11, number 1 and 2. All right, from the Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion. All right, and this is the article we're going to read. It says, this by bibliography is based on the same principles as its predecessor, which appeared more than a decade ago. The annotations of the items are designed to indicate similar angles, such as the beginning and destruction of the Khazar state, eventual continuation after the 10th century conversion, problems of migration westward, and the origin of Eastern European Jewry. But this time, the emphasis is also on several additional angles, such as the visibility or lack of it in Jewish sources of the connection between the Khazars and Judaism or Jews. The application of the history of the Khazars to today's political purposes and its combination with anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish, or anti-Israeli tendencies. The first of these angles is already found in Josephus's genealogical table, 9th or 10th century, which depicts the Khazars as descendants of Togarma, a grandson of Noah's son Japhet. All right, so let's go back to that table we had earlier. All right, so Togarma, right? Togarma right here. All right, Togarma. The Khazars come out of this person, it says. Supposedly, the Khazars, Togarma, from Gomer, and Japhet. All right. Without mentioning that they, at least some of them, had any connection with Judaism. It is carried over into later centuries, for examples by two 12th century Jewish travelers, Benjamin of Tudela and Petachia of Riesenberg. Bibliography, and as the number says, and Ishak Abramanel, commentary of Ezekiel, chapter 38, which by implication counts the Khazars among the people who will come with Gog to fight the Jews in the land of Israel and perish there. You see that? They will come with Gog. The Khazars, man, these Confederate. Who's the Khazars? See why they ain't mentioning the Khazars or want to be connected to these Khazars? All right? Among the people who will come with Gog to fight the Jews in the land of Israel and perish there. This, written in 1493, indicates that he regards the Khazars as anti-Jewish Gentiles. And then right here got a couple of sources. It says here by Marcus Nathan Adler, the itinerary of Benjamin of Tudela says the southern provinces of Russia were spoken of as the land of the Khazars, especially by Jewish writers long after the Russian conquest, about the year 1000. And the Crimea was known to European travelers as Khazaria. All right. On this side, it says Naji Aluj Al-Masira ila Palestine, says the journey to Palestine, 1964, says there were 10 million Jewish Khazars. Thus, the Jews of Eastern Europe, who were the most Zionistic, did not originate in the kingdom of Judah and were not Semites. It says here by Menachem Amelander, Ben Solomon Halevi. All right, it says first edition Yiddish Amsterdam, 1741. Then it says new edition translation into Hebrew by Haim Homer Jerusalem in 1964. I don't remember the quoting sources here. It says Jehuda Halevi translated the Sefer HaKusari from the Khazar language. According to Arab authors, Khazar or Khazar, right, was the son of Japhet, or a descendant of Japhet, the son of Noah. Khazar separated from his brothers after they left the ark, and he came to the river Volga, building a large city there, which he called Al-Khazar. These people who lived on the north side of the Caspian Sea are also called Khazars, since they joined the Khazar nation. At first, the Khazar king leaned toward the Karaite form of Judaism until Rabbi Judah al-Nagari explained to him that this is not the real Judaism. He then converted to traditional Judaism, and according to the teachings of our rabbis, over 100,000 people converted to Judaism. You see that? They converts. All right? Now we got another source here. It says Baraz GM Dreineshiv Eritsko Khazaro Ruski. All right, he got a very long name. All right, the oldest Jewish Khazar Russian legal monument, the legal code for people, in Sobrani Trudov po Bopruso. All right, that's Russian. All right there again. It says collected works on the problem of the Jewish element in the monuments of Old Russian literature, Volume 1. This is from 1927, and it says, insofar as the Slavic nations, especially the Bulgars, were influenced by the Old Testament, it was through the Jewish Khazars. All right, Slavic nations, Jewish Khazars the converts. The original legal code, which was enforced in Khazaria, consisted of the religio-civil code designed for the populace. All right, another source here says Julian Bartosiewicz, Studia Historicini y Literati, or Historical and Literary Studies, Volume 2, from 1881. All right, it says the Khazars were a people related to the Huns. All right, the Huns. The Khazar state was multi-tribal, speaking a language which resembled that of the Volga Bulgars. The religion of the top rulers was Judaism, to which they changed from Islam. From what? From Islam. From what? From Islam. All right, you see the relation? You see where the relation's going, right? Confederate, you see what's going on here, right? We're going to get deeper into this as the videos go. All right? All right, another source here, it says Bashmakov, or Une solution nouvelle de problème de Khazars, Mercury de France. All right, pages 39 and 73 says the Khazars' racial origin and the geographic position of their capital seems to confirm the information given in King Joseph's letter. Gotta get into that. It says here John O. Betty, The Iron Curtain Over America, Dallas 1951, chapters 3 and 4, Russia and the Khazars joined the Democratic Party. It says the author maintains that communism is the creation of Judaized Khazars in Russia. The Marxian program of drastic controls, so repugnant to the free Western mind, was no obstacle to the acceptance by many Khazar Jews, for the Babylonian Talmud, under which they lived, had taught them to accept authoritarian dictation on everything from their immorality to their trade practices. He also states that persons of Khazar background or tradition, or of related origin or ideology, are in high positions and influence in the American Democratic Party and the United States government, and that they play leading roles in England and France. All right, it says here from Ishak Ben Sevi. All right, so from Tel Aviv from 1951. It says Jews came very early to the Crimea, where they organized agriculture and urban settlements and took over the commerce between the Slavs and the Khazars, upon both of whom they exerted some influence. But it was mainly the Persian Jews, again, who was these Persian Jews, who influenced the Khazar king, Bulan, and his top officials to convert to Judaism in 732 or 740. The military and civilian elite were the first to become Jews, and later others followed in their footsteps. In the 9th and the beginning of the 10th century, when the Khazars conquered the Crimea, the local Crimean Jews integrated into Khazar Jewry. At the beginning of the 11th century, the Khazar state was definitely defeated by the Russian princes, losing its oldest center on the River Don, but continuing to rule in Dagestan, northern Caucasus, and the Crimea. It has now become clear that something of the Jewish Khazar state existed up to the 13th century until the Mongol invasion. So-called Mongol. Who's this? These hordes. The hordes, which is the Russian armies. Talking about Georgy, Genghis, aka Genghis. Okay, we got another source here. It says from Jivo Blätter 13 from 1938. Pages 109 to 23, says the native Crimean Jews, the Krimchaki and the Karaites, have different blood types than the Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews. Right? They're different. You see, the Karaites, they ain't the same as these Ashkenazi. We learned about the Karaites and Prester John, right? All right, but they have a different blood type than the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic Jews. Their blood structure is close to that of the pure Turkic tribes from Jafet, right, and the Kyrgyz and the Uzbeks. This blood composition may possibly be connected with the Khazar origin. All right, we got another source here from Mohammed Isat Darwasa. Says Tariq Bani Israeli min Asfarim, The History of the Children of Israel from their books, Volume 3, Cairo 1960. It says the Khazars were the largest group to convert to Judaism, and they are known as Ashkenazism. What? The Khazars are known as Ashkenazism. They converted to Judaism. Another source here says Max Diamant and Arthur Price, Diesharen, Adu. Oh, I can't read that. All right, and this is from the Judische Volkskunst by Max Diamant in 1937. It says before the immigration of Jews from Germany, remnants of the Khazars who had converted to Judaism in their Asiatic abodes came to Poland. So before they got to Poland or Germany, all right, Jews from Germany, right? They didn't originate there. They didn't just go from the Holy Land to Germany. All right, these were Khazars who converted to Judaism, all right, before they got there to Poland. Traces of their culture can be found in the Jewish art of Eastern Europe. Julil Jasen, Historia Evrekrikosko Narodo Rossi, The History of the Jewish People in Russia, Volume 1. All right, and it goes right here. It says the Khazars came from Asia into South Russian steppe, where they formed a number of urban settlements. In the 8th century, the Khazar king Kagan and his entourage embraced the Jewish religion. They embraced it, they converted. During the same century, they overpowered the Eastern Slavic tribes. A century later, they spread their rule over the whole territory between northern Caucasus and the Kiev region. By 964 or thereabouts, the Kiev prince defeated the Khazars, who soon disappeared. See? Like I told you, they say they disappeared, but they actually went to Poland. There's a lot of different investigations, all right, that they actually settled in Poland. All right, like it says over here on this side, look, I didn't read this. Like Jewish settlements in Poland and Russia, all right? So they were around for about 300, 400 years. That's not a little bit. That was a lot. That was a big empire. They were controlling the trade and all that between Europe and Asia, all right? These Khazars. All right, so now we're in this book. It's called The 13th Tribe, The Khazar Empire and Its Heritage by Arthur Koestler. All right, now it says, this book traces the history of the ancient Khazar Empire, a major but almost forgotten power in Eastern Europe, which in the Dark Ages became converted to Judaism. Khazaria was finally wiped out by the forces of Genghis Khan, but evidence indicates that the Khazars themselves migrated to Poland and formed the cradle of Western Jewry. The Khazars' sway extended from the Black Sea to the Caspian, from the Caucasus to the Volga, and they were instrumental in stopping the Muslim onslaught against Byzantium, the eastern jaw of the gigantic pincer movement that in the west swept across northern Africa and into Spain. So they were actually helping Europe not get invaded that much by Muslims or Arabs, because they were kind of in the way. You know, to get to from Asia to Europe, you have to go through the Caucasus if you don't want to go through Africa and the Mediterranean. So yeah, they were holding that down, and they weren't letting nobody go by there. So they were kind of helping. They had an important role. All right. In the second part of this book, The Heritage, Mr. Koestler speculates about the ultimate fate of the Khazars and their impact on the racial composition and social heritage of modern Jewry. He produces a large body of meticulously detailed research in support of a theory that sounds all the more convincing for the restraint with which it is advanced. Yet, should this theory be confirmed, the term anti-Semitism would become void of meaning, since, as Mr. Koestler writes, it is based on a misapprehension shared by both the killers and their victims. The story of the Khazar Empire, as it slowly emerges from the past, begins to look like the most cruel hoax which history has ever perpetrated. All right, y'all think they're getting? Who are these Khazars today? Part 1, Rise and Fall of the Khazars. It says here, about the time when Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of the West, the eastern confines of Europe, between the Caucasus and the Volga, were ruled by a Jewish state known as the Khazar Empire. Alright, so by the time of Charlemagne, this famous king, there was already a Jewish state known openly by everyone. The Khazar Empire was a Jewish state. Alright, during the time of Charlemagne. At the peak of its power from the 7th to the 10th centuries AD, it played a significant part in shaping the destinies of medieval and consequently of modern Europe. All right, an important part. This Khazar Empire in modern Europe are a very important part in medieval and modern Europe. The Byzantine Emperor and historian Constantine Porphyro Genitus must have been well aware of this when he recorded in his treatise on court protocol that letters addressed to the Pope in Rome, and similarly those to Emperor of the West, had a gold seal worth 2 solidi attached to them, whereas messages to the King of the Khazars displayed a seal worth 3 solidi. It had more worth, they're saying. This was not flattery, but real politic. In the period with which we are concerned, wrote Bury, it is probable that the Khan of the Khazars was a little less important in view of the imperial foreign policy than Charles the Great and his successors. All right, so he had a very important role. He was respected just like Charles the Great. A few years later, probably AD 740, the king, his court, and the military ruling class embraced the Jewish faith. All right, this is it right here. How did they become Jews then in Hebrews? Kurimeo says that in the year 740, the Khazar Empire, the king, right, his court, the military ruling class, they all embraced the Jewish faith, and Judaism became the state religion of the Khazars. It became. No doubt their contemporaries were as astonished by this decision as modern scholars were when they came across the evidence in the Arab, Byzantine, Russian, and Hebrew sources. You understand? Modern scholars know this is a fact. It's in the Arab sources, right? The Byzantine sources, the Russian sources, and Hebrew sources. All right, classical antique sources. One of the most recent comments is to be found in a work by the Hungarian Marxist historian Dr. Antal Barta. His book on the Magyar society in the 8th and 9th centuries has several chapters on the Khazars, as during most of that period the Hungarians were ruled by them. Yet their conversion to Judaism is discussed in a single paragraph. With our investigations cannot go into problems pertaining to the history of ideas, but we must call the reader's attention to the matter of the Khazar kingdom's state religion. It was the Jewish faith which became the official religion of the ruling strata of society. It became, needless to say, the acceptance of the Jewish faith as the state religion of an ethnically non-Jewish people or non-Hebrew people. Non-Hebrew, they're not the Hebrews, could be the subject of interesting speculations. We shall, however, confine ourselves to the remark that this official conversion is defiance of Christian proselytizing by Byzantium, the Muslim influence from the East, and in spite of the political pressure of these two powers, to a religion which had no support from any political power, but was persecuted by nearly all, has come as a surprise to all historians concerned with the Khazars and cannot be considered as accidental, but must be regarded as a sign of the independent policy pursued by that kingdom. Continues as which leaves us only slightly more bewildered than before. Yet whereas the sources differ in minor detail, the major facts are beyond dispute. Alright, so there's a fact. It's a fact that they converted, is what he's saying. What is in dispute, though, what is they're disputing, though, is the fate of the Jewish Khazars. What happened to these so-called Jewish Khazars after the destruction of their empire in the 12th and 13th century? On this problem, the sources are scant, but various late medieval Khazar settlements are mentioned in the Crimea, in the Ukraine, in Hungary, Poland, and Lithuania. The general picture that emerges from these fragmentary pieces of information is that of a migration of Khazar tribes and communities into those regions of Eastern Europe, mainly Russia and Poland. Now it says here, where at the dawn of the modern age, the greatest concentrations of Jews were found. All right, so Russia and Poland. All right, they know the Khazar tribes ended up there, large communities of the Khazar, and that's actually where the largest concentrations of Jews are found in Europe, Russia and Poland. All right, this has led several historians to conjecture that a substantial part and perhaps the majority of Eastern Jews, the majority, remember the dude said 80% of the DNA, and hence of world Jewry, might be of Khazar and not Semitic origin. All right, the Eastern Jews, not Semitic. The far-reaching implications of this hypothesis may explain the great caution exercised by historians in approaching this subject, if they do not avoid it altogether. Thus, in the 1973 edition of the Encyclopedia Judaica, the article Khazars is signed by Dunlop, but there's a separate section dealing with the Khazar Jews after the fall of the kingdom, signed by the editors, and written with the obvious intent to avoid upsetting believers in the dogma of the chosen race. Now it says the Turkish-speaking Karaites, a fundamentalist Jewish sect. Alright? Who are these Turkish-speaking Karaites? I'm talking about the ancient ones, not the ones that we believe they are. Alright? Of Crimea, Poland, and elsewhere have affirmed a connection with the Chazars, which is perhaps confirmed by evidence from folklore and anthropology as well as language. There seems to be a considerable amount of evidence attesting to the continued presence in Europe of descendants of the Khazars. How important in quantitative terms is that presence? All right, so how important, how big of a presence he's saying, right? He's quoting other people here, but then now the author's saying of this article or book saying, so how quantitative, how big is this, how important is this presence of the Caucasian sons of Japhet and the tents of Shem? What? Oh, he's going biblical now. One of the most radical propounders of the hypothesis concerning the Khazar's origin of Jewry is the professor of medieval Jewish history at Tel Aviv University, A.N. Polyak. His book, Khazaria, in Hebrew, was published in 1944 in Tel Aviv, and a second edition in 1951. In his introduction, he writes the facts demand. Saying a new approach both to the problem of the relations between the Khazar Jewry and other Jewish communities, and to the question of how far we can go in regarding this Khazar Jewry as the nucleus of the large Jewish settlement in Eastern Europe. The descendants of this settlement, those who stayed where they were, those who emigrated to the United States and to other countries, and those who went to Israel, meaning the state of Israel, constitute now the large majority of world Jewry. Letting you know, this professor in 1944 book he wrote, this was written before the full extent of the Holocaust was known, but that does not alter the fact that the large majority of surviving Jews in the world is of Eastern European, and thus perhaps mainly of Khazar origin. If so, this would mean that their ancestors came not from the Jordan, but from the Volga, not from Canaan, not from America, but from the Caucasus, once believed to be the cradle of the Aryan race, and that genetically they are more closely related to the Hun. The Hun, we're going to see these people related to Mongols, that are related to Turks earlier, the Turkish-speaking Karaites. So they're mostly related to the Hun, Uyghur, and Magyar tribes, then to the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Should this turn out to be the case, then the term anti-Semitism would become void of meaning, based on misapprehension shared by both the killers and their victims. The story of the Khazar Empire, as it slowly emerges from the past, begins to look like the most cruel hoax which history has ever perpetrated. Begins to look like the most cruel hoax which history has ever perpetrated. All right. Right now I'm in the Jewish Almanac from 1980. All right, this is the cover right here. It says a celebration of Jewish life and the Jewish people, a fact-filled book. All right, again, a fact-filled book of information and entertainment. All right, traditions, history, religion, wisdom, and achievements. Again, the Jewish Almanac. All right, and we go right to part one of this Almanac magazine, Jewish Almanac, and it says part one, identity crisis. It says a brief history of the terms for Jew. All right, we're gonna get into that. All right, so I'm zoomed in now. All right, so you can see it clearly, and it says here, strictly speaking, it is incorrect to call an ancient Israelite a Jew. All right, again, strictly speaking, it is incorrect to call an ancient Israelite a Jew, or to call a contemporary Jew an Israelite. All right, so you can't say that the ancient Israelites are the same as Jews. All right, that's incorrect. And you can't say that modern Jews or contemporary Jews are Israelite or a Hebrew. You can't say they're Hebrew contemporary Jews, all right? Again, we're in the Jewish Almanac of 1980. So you can't, just because somebody's called a Jew, basically what they're saying, that doesn't mean, that's incorrect to think that they're talking about an Israelite or a Hebrew. The first Hebrews may not have been Jews at all. Again, the first Hebrews, remember, Hebrews may not have been Jews at all. All right, so we're in Online Etymology Dictionary. All right, and we got the word Hebrew here. Just wanted to go ahead and read this before we continue. So what is Hebrew? It says here an adjective, right? It says late Old English, from Old French Hebrew, from Latin Hebraeus, from Greek Hebraeos, and Aramaic Semitic Hebrai, corresponding to Hebrew Ibri, and Israelite, in quotes. Traditionally from an ancestral name Eber, all right, so they get it from Eber, but probably literally, all right, but most likely literally one from the other side. One from the other side. So if you're in Africa or you're in Europe and you want to reference an American, you're going to say, well, he's one from the other side, right? He's on the other side of the ocean. Perhaps in reference to the river Euphrates. Is this the real ancient Atlantic Ocean? Was it just a river? Was it a huge river? So perhaps simply signifying immigrant. All right, so look at what it all means. It says Eber also means region on the other or opposite side. All right, a region on the opposite side. So wouldn't America be on the opposite side of Europe, Asia, and Africa? All right, America is on the opposite side. See, Hebrew? Are you a Hebrew? Well, if you're on the opposite side of Africa and Europe, meaning if you're in America, yeah, you could use Hebrew as an adjective. All right, so we're trying to break this down, not trying to say this is a religion or anything, just trying to show the etymology, because it means something, right? It doesn't just mean a religion or something like that, right? So it's a very general term, actually, as you can see, but it means something specifically to somebody being separated, all right? Being separated or unreachable to certain people, all right? On another side. All right, so again, the Jewish Almanac of 1980, all right, letting you know that strictly speaking, it is incorrect to call an ancient Israelite a Jew, or to call a contemporary Jew an Israelite or a Hebrew, all right? The first Hebrews may not have been Jews at all. It says here, Israelite, like Hebrew, became a common synonym for Jew throughout post-biblical history, down to modern times, where perhaps less adaptability or to pejorative usage than the other terms. Since the founding of the State of Israel in 1948, the term has come to jostle against the newer term, Israeli, which is not synonymous, okay? It's not synonymous in general, Israelite, okay? It's not synonymous with Israelite. It's not the same thing, which means a biblical follower of the religion of Moses and a descendant of Jacob. Israelite means a citizen of the state of Israel, okay? That's what Israelite means. It's different, whether Jewish in religion or not. Though, of course, most Israelis are Jewish in religion, get it? Now let's read about Jew, because a lot of people like to use this term. Shout out to Anu, breaking this down always. We study in the background, and this is for everybody right here. So it's incorrect to call anybody a Jew unless they fall under this, which is they're going to explain right here. So it says here the term Jew is originally derived from the tribal name Judah. Judah, okay? The name of the fourth son of Jacob. Judahites, that is, descendants of Judah, were organized along with some neighboring tribes by their kingman, King David, into a mini kingdom centered in Hebron before David became the first truly pan-Israelite monarch. Prior to this time, the Judahites were cut off from their northern brethren by encampments of Philistines. When David captured the city of Jerusalem from the Jebusites, a Canaanite people, was that in Cusco? He opened up a vital corridor connecting the northern and southern tribes, thus permitting unification of the nation Israel. David was then made king David was then made king over all Israel. Prester John, huh? In preference to the surviving sons of Saul. The tenuous union of northern and southern tribes worked well during the reigns of David and his son Solomon. But when Solomon died, the two regions again split off from one another. It is likely that the social and religious character of Judah, the southern kingdom, was different from that of the north, more cosmopolitan, less rooted in the tribal territorial claims, more suited for survival as a culture during exile. In short, more Jewish-ish in the pre-1948 understanding of the term. The exile of Judah came in 586 BC, when large numbers of the inhabitants were deported to Babylon from the Judean, came to be the principal term for the follower of the Mosaic religion, and it has remained so to the present day in the book of Esther, set in Persia. The Benjaminite Mordecai, technically a member of the 10 lost tribes, is called Jehudi, Judean or Jew. The book even introduces the verb mitajahed, becoming Jewish, converting to Judaism. Both factors suggest that the term, though still rooted in ethnic considerations, had broadened its scope from tribal, territorial, and national terms to religious in a more universalistic sense, from the Hebrew Jehudi via Aramaic Jehudai, Greek Iodios, and Latin Judeos. The term Jew passed into European languages. Alright, hope you guys understand that. Basically, unless you are a descendant of the tribe of Judah, a Judite, right? You shouldn't be calling yourself Judean or Jewish. Again, the term Jew is originally derived from the tribal name Judah. Just Judah, not all the tribes of Israel.
Your grandfather was the founding, one of the founding fathers of the state of Israel?
Yes, he was.
Tell us about this.
Yes, he was. The generation of my grandparents was the generation of the first Jews to take on Zionism as an ideology and take on this idea of establishing a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And he was very active. He became a leader within the movement. He was a member of the de facto Jewish government before the State of Israel was established. And he was one of the signers on the Declaration of Independence when the State of Israel was established.
Okay, and then from there, your father actually, he was the general.
My father was, yes, both my parents were born in Palestine. So they're the first generation Israelis, if you will, first generation Jews who were born there. And my father, as a young man, while still in high school, joined the Zionist militia. He became an officer. So in the War of 1948, when the Zionists occupied most of Palestine, he was an officer already. And then he remained in the military as a career officer. And by 1967, he was already a general and a member of the Israeli Central Command, the High Command.
Somebody's pointing the finger and say, this guy's anti-Semitic. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I'm Jewish, so being anti-Semitic is nonsense. Number one. Number two, being anti-Semitic means being racist against Jews. I'm not racist against Jews. But I am critical of the State of Israel. I'm critical of Zionism, which has really nothing to do with Jews, although they claim to. So there's nothing anti-Semitic about criticizing Israel. In fact, most Jews don't even live there. Most Jews never accepted Zionism, so I don't think that has anything to do with it. And it's a claim that's being thrown out when there's nothing else to say. When the other side, the pro-Israeli side, the side that supports the violence in Palestine, has nothing to say, they say anti-Semitic. Well, so they say anti-Semitic.
What if someone says, look, he's just a self-hating Jew? Have you heard this statement?
Yeah, well, I certainly don't hate myself. That's nonsense. Yeah. And I don't hate anybody else. I think it's one of those things they throw at you when they've got no argument.
I just had a rabbi give me an analogy. He said, look, imagine you left your home and then someone came and occupied it, and then you try to get it back, and then they went to the judge. Have you heard some of these analogies? Maybe you can.
Yeah, that's assuming that, that's taking it to a place which I don't usually go. That's making the assumption that today's Jews are really the descendants of the ancient Hebrews that used to live in that part of the world some 3,000 years ago. That's making the assumption that today's Jews are really the descendants of the ancient Hebrews that used to live in that part of the world some 3,000 years ago. That's a bit of a stretch for me. And even if it was true, I don't think it. I agree with him. It doesn't justify. I did not live there 3,000 years ago. My grandparents immigrated from Ukraine. Their parents, their grandparents didn't live there, and I don't know any Jew that can trace his or her ancestors back to the ancient Hebrews. I did not live there 3,000 years ago. My grandparents immigrated from Ukraine. Their parents, their grandparents didn't live there, and I don't know any Jew that can trace his or her ancestors back to the ancient Hebrews. So that's a lot of myth there, and I don't think it's relevant. So that's a lot of myth there.
Facts are facts. The truth about the Khazars, the so-called Jews, distinguishing between the Jew and Hebrews who are Israelites. By Benjamin H. Friedman, a Jewish man writes about the Jews. This is the cover of this book, the original. All right, so again, this is written by Benjamin Friedman, right? And this particular book is more like a letter or a statement he wanted to give to Dr. David Goldstein, LLD. All right. Before we continue in that book, though, because he's going to reference this encyclopedia right here, so I wanted to read this first to you guys. We can have a background of what he's talking about. And this is actually the Jewish Encyclopedia from 1902. This is volume 6, right? And it starts with Chazars and ends with Dreyfus case. So these are all the people, all the so-called scholars and specialists that helped create this encyclopedia. And this is the editorial board. Okay, as you guys can see, all these people contribute to the encyclopedia. This ain't pseudo. These are people that know what they're talking about. We're going to go right to the first definition of this book, which again is Chazars. All right, the Jewish Encyclopedia again. All right, so what do we have here? First, Chazars. Let me zoom in. It's here, the Chazars. The Chazars, huh? Who's the Chazars? A people of Turkish origin whose life and history are interwoven with the very beginnings of the history of the Jews of Russia. So who's the Jews of Russia? They're the Chazars, huh? The Chazars. The Caesars, Chazars, or Khazars. The kingdom of the Chazars was firmly established in most of South Russia long before the foundation of the Russian monarchy by the Varangians in 855. Jews have lived on the shores of the Black and Caspian Seas since the first centuries of the Common Era. Historical evidence points to the region of the Ural as the home of the Chazars. Among the classical writers of the Middle Ages, they were known as the Chazars, Khazirs, or Akatsirs, and Akatirs, and in the Russian chronicles as Kawalises and Ugri Bieldio. The Armenian writers of the 5th and following centuries furnish ample information concerning these people. Moses of Chorin refers to the invasion by the Khazars of Armenia and Iberia at the beginning of the 3rd century. The Chagan was the king of the north, the ruler of the Khazirs, and the queen was the Chaton. The Chazars first came to Armenia with the Basilians in 198. Though at first repulsed, they subsequently became important factors in Armenian history for a period of 800 years. Driven onward by the nomadic tribes of the steppes and by their own desire for plunder and revenge, they made frequent invasions into Armenia. The latter country was made the battleground in the long struggle between the Romans and the Persians. This struggle, which finally resulted in the loss by Armenia of her independence, paved the way for the political importance of the Chazars. The conquest of eastern Armenia by the Persians in the 4th century rendered the latter dangerous to the Chazars, who, for their own protection, formed an alliance with the Byzantines. This alliance was renewed from time to time until the final conquest of the Chazars by the Russians. Their first aid was rendered to the Byzantine Emperor Julian in 363. About 434, they were, for a time, tributary to Attila. Sidonius Apollinaris relates that the Chazars followed the banners of Attila, and in 452 fought on the Catalonian fields in company with the Black Huns and Alans. All right, again, the Black Huns. Yeah, there was black so-called Huns. Yeah, so-called black. They are talking about dark complexion Huns. We've read that in the book Ancient and Modern Britons, in my Swarti Euro videos. Right? Yeah, the Black Huns. The Persian king Kobak, 488 to 531, undertook the construction of a line of forts through the pass between Durban and the Caucasus in order to guard against the invasion of the Khazars, Turks, and other warlike tribes. His son Chosroes Anushirvan built the wall of Derbent, repeatedly mentioned by the Oriental geographers and historians as Bab al-Abwab. In the second half of the 6th century, the Chazars moved westward. They established themselves in the territory bounded by the Sea of Azov, the Don and Lower Volga, the Caspian Sea, and the northern Caucasus. The Caucasian Goths, Tetrasites, were subjugated by the Chazars, probably about the 7th century. Early in that century, the kingdom of the Chazars had become powerful enough to enable the Chagan to send to the Byzantine emperor Heraclius an army of 40,000 men, by whose aid he conquered the Persians in 626-627. The Chazars had already occupied the northeastern part of the Black Sea region. According to the historian Moses Kalonkatashi, the Chazars, under their leader Jebu Chagan, called Sibol Chagan by the Greek writers, penetrated into Persian territory as early as the second campaign of Heraclius, on which they devastated Albania. Nicephorus testifies that Heraclius repeatedly showed marks of esteem to his ally, the Chagan of the Chazars, to whom he even promised his daughter in marriage. In the great battle between Chazars and Arabs near Kislayr, 4,000 Mohammedan soldiers and their leader were slain. In the year 669, the Ugrians, or Sabirs, freed themselves from the rule of the Obrians, settled between the Don and the Caucasus, and came under the dominion of the Chazars. For this reason, the Ugrians, who had hitherto been called the White or Independent Ugrians, are described in chronicles ascribed to Nestor as the Black or Dependent Ugrians. They were no longer governed by their own princes, but were ruled by the kings of the Chazars. In 735, when the Arab leader Mervin moved from Georgia against the Chazars, he attacked the Ungrians also. In 679, the Chazars subjugated the Bulgars and extended their sway farther west between the Don and the Dnieper. Alright, the Don, remember this is about the Danites, that comes from the Danites, they were there originally, that's why that area is called the Don, and the Dnieper. Okay, so they were settled there as well, and as far as the headwaters of the Donets, Don, Dan, in the province of Lebedia. It was probably about that time that the Chagan of the Chazars and his grandees, together with a large number of his heathen people, listen to this is the Jewish encyclopedia, heathen people, they're spilling the beans on themselves. Heathen people embraced the Jewish religion, embraced Judaism. According to a Harkavi, the conversion took place in 620, according to others in 740. King Joseph, in his letter to Hasdai ibn Sharprut, about 960, gives the following account of the conversion. All right, King Joseph, huh? So, yeah, they're talking about these Chazars or Khazars, which converted and embraced Judaism. King Joseph, about 960, it says he gives the following account of the conversion. Some centuries ago, King Bulan reigned over the Chazars. To him, God appeared in a dream and promised him might and glory. Encouraged by this dream, Bulan went by the road of Darien to the country of Ardebil, where he gained great victories over the Arabs. the Byzantine emperor and the caliph of the Ishmaelites, all right, Ishmaelites sent to him envoys with presents and sages to convert him to their respective religions. All right, you guys hear what's going on? So at this time, Bulan was kind of like trying to end supposedly all the idolatry and stuff that was going on in his country. We're going to read. And just embrace, I don't think just for religious purposes or beliefs, but for having strategic connections with certain empires. He wanted to either convert his people and himself to Islam and be Muslims, or, you know, Catholics, Christians, or Judaism. So, as we just read, we had the Ishmaelites, right? The sons of Ishmael, sent him gifts and stuff to try to make him go into their faith so they can be allied with him, so his people can embrace the Muslim faith. Bulan invited also wise men of Israel and proceeded to examine them all. As each of the champions believed his religion to be the best, Bulan separately questioned the Mohammedans and the Christians as to which of the other two religions they considered the better. When both gave preference to that of the Jews, that king perceived that it must be the true religion. He therefore adopted it. The real account is in their biblioteca, all right? The Khazars' conversion. Before we continue, I want to show you guys this map, because that other author from that other book is going to mention it. I want to show you guys what it says here. You guys look at the little box here describing what this means. You guys see right here, who are the so-called Jews? Is the Chazars in parentheses, right? These are the so-called Jews. They're the Chazars or Khazars. We just heard that Khazars were actually converts mostly. So it wasn't through lineage, but through religion that they became so-called Jews. This is in the Jewish encyclopedia we're reading, Fair Use. This account of the conversion was considered to be a legendary nature. Harkavi, however, and Bilbasov and Yarkisa Biblioteca prove from Arabic and Slavonian sources that the religious disputation at the Khazarian court is a historical fact. It's a historical fact that they converted. You guys listening? Okay? They converted. Even the name of Sangari has been found in a liturgy of Constantine the philosopher, Cyril. It was one of the successors of Bulan, named Obadiah, who regenerated the kingdom and strengthened the Jewish religion. He invited Jewish scholars to settle in his dominions and founded synagogues and schools. The people were instructed in the Bible, Mishnah, and Talmud, and in the divine service of the Hasanim. In their writings, the Chazars used the Hebrew succession letters. All right, they adopted the Hebrew alphabet. Obadiah was succeeded by his son Hezekiah, the latter by his son Manasseh, Manasseh by Hanukkah, a brother of Obadiah, Hanukkah by his son Isaac, Isaac by his son Moses, or Manasseh II, the latter by his son Nisi, and Nisi by his son Aaron II. King Joseph himself was a son of Aaron, and ascended the throne in accordance with the law of the Chazars relating to succession. On the whole, King Joseph's account agrees generally with the evidence given by the Arabic writers of the 10th century, but in detail it contains a few discrepancies. According to Ibn Fadlan, Ibn Dasta, and others, only the king and the grandees were followers of Judaism. The rest of the Chazars were Christians, Mohammedans, and heathens, and the Jews were in a great minority. All right? Listen to what they're telling you. It was actually the leaders who were the real followers of Judaism, right? According to Mas'udi, the king and the Chazars proper were Jews, but the army consisted of Mohammedans, while the other inhabitants, especially the Slavonians and Russians, were heathens, from the word Kitab al-Buldan, written about the 9th century, cited by Strowell's son and Izviestilla or Chazarak, etc. It appears as if all the Chazars were Jews, and that they had been converted to Judaism only in a short time before the book was written. They had been converted. But this work was probably inspired by Honey, and it may be assumed that in the 9th century many Chazars heathens became Jews, owing to the religious seal of King Obadiah, because he forced everybody to convert. All right, Facts Are Facts, The Truth About the Khazars by Benjamin Friedman. I'm going to belly flop to this part of the book, or his letter, where he introduces Rabbi Louis Finkelstein and what he was saying about what the so-called Jewish religion or Judaism is today and where it actually came from or was adopted from. It says here, the eminent Rabbi Louis Finkelstein, the head of the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, often referred to as the Vatican of Judaism, in his foreword to his first edition of his world-famous classic, The Pharisees, the sociological background of their faith, on page 21 states, Judaism, Phariseeism, became Talmudism, okay? That became what? Talmudism. Talmudism became medieval rabbinism. And medieval rabbinism became modern rabbinism. All right? You guys see? It's basically Talmudism. It's mostly Talmud following what so-called Jews are practicing today. But throughout these changes in name, the spirit of the ancient Pharisees survives unaltered. From Palestine to Babylon, from Babylon to North Africa, Italy, Spain, France, and Germany, from these to Poland, Russia, and Eastern Europe, generally, ancient Toryism has wandered, demonstrate the enduring importance which attaches to Pharaohism as a religious movement. Now, this same rabbi, he has another quote of his, right? Rabbi Louis Finkelstein, in collaboration with celebrated Rabbi H.G. Enlow, published in 1903 by the Louisville section of the Council of Jewish Women, in which Rabbi Adolf Moses on page 1 states, among the innumerable misfortunes which have befallen, the most fatal in its consequences is the name Judaism. Worse still, the Jews themselves, who have gradually come to call their religion Judaism, yet neither in biblical nor post-biblical, neither in Talmudic nor in much later time, is the term Judaism ever heard. All right, these are real people, right? Rabbis that know their history. That you know that not even that word existed or was ever heard. The Bible speaks of the religion as Torah Yahweh, or the law of Hawa, right? Torah Hawa, the instruction or the moral law revealed by Hawa. In other places as Jidaf Hawa, the fear and reverence of Hawa. These and other appellations continued for many ages to stand for the religion, to distinguish it from Christianity and Islam. The Jewish philosophers sometimes designated it as the faith or belief of the Jews. It was Flavius Josephus, Piso, aka Piso, writing for the instruction of Greeks and Romans, aka Paul the Apostle, right, who coined the term Judaism. Oh, how convenient that, right, the Pisos had something to do with that term, right, and it didn't exist before. You guys see the connections here, right? In order to pit it against Hellenism, create both sides, right, control each side. Let's make them fight against each other. Judaism versus Hellenism. By Hellenism was understood the civilization comprising language, poetry, religion, art, science, manners, customs, institutions, which had spread from Greece, right? Its original home. Check out my series, The Gospels According to Piso. If you guys haven't checked that out, great series in reference to what they're talking about right here. The Christians eagerly seized upon the name. The Jews themselves, who intensely detested the traitor Josephus, refrained from reading his works. Hence, the term Judaism coined by Josephus remained absolutely unknown to them. It was only in comparatively recent times, after the Jews became familiar with modern Christian literature, that they began to name their religion Judaism. Okay? Now, he is quoting, again, a celebrated Rabbi Adolf Moses and Rabbi Louis Finkelstein. They're letting you know that the so-called Jews made that word up. Who were the so-called Jews? Remember what it say here? So-called Jews, Chazars. Who's the Chazars? They had converted to Judaism, the word they created. Basically, converts who follow the Talmud. This statement by the world's two leading authorities on this subject clearly establishes beyond any question or any doubt the so-called Judaism was not the name of any form of religious worship practiced in Judea in the time of Jesus, all right, so-called. The Flavius Josephus referred to in the above quotation lived in the 1st century All right, Piso. All right, Dr. Hijack on their chronologies. It was he who coined the word Judaism. It was all the Pisos, again, in the first century explicitly for the purpose recited clearly above. Religious worship known and practiced today under the name of Judaism by so-called or self-styled Jews throughout the world was known and practiced in Judea in the time of Jesus under the name Pharisaism, all right? Pharisees, according to Rabbi Louis Wittgenstein, head of the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, and all other most competent and qualified recognized authorities on the subject. The form of religious worship known as Pharisaism in Judea in the time of Jesus was a religious practice based exclusively upon the Talmud. Upon the Talmud. The Talmud in the time of Jesus was the Magna Carta, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights all rolled into one. All those who practice Pharisaism. All right, we're going to go ahead and belly flopped a little more ahead in the book. It says, my many years of intensive research established beyond the question of any doubt, contrary to the generally accepted belief held by Christians that the so-called or self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe at any time in their history in Eastern Europe were never the legendary lost 10 tribes of Bible lore. That historic fact is incontrovertible, okay? They are not the lost 10 tribes. Relentless research established as equally true that the so-called or self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe at no time in their history could be correctly regarded as the direct lineal descendants of the legendary lost 10 tribes of Bible lore. The so-called or self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe in modern history cannot legitimately point to a single ancient ancestor who ever set even a foot on the soil of Palestine in the era of Bible history. Research also revealed that the so-called or self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe were never Semites, are not Semites or Shemites, right? From Shem. They're not from Shem. Ashkenaz is a descendant of Gomer, a son of Japhet. So, as it's saying here, they were never Semites, are not Semites now, nor can they ever be regarded as Semites at any future time by any stretch of the imagination. Exhaustive research also irrevocably rejects as a fantastic fabrication the generally accepted belief by Christians that so-called or self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe are the legendary chosen people so very vocally publicized by the Christian clergy from their pulpits. Maybe you can explain to me, my dear Dr. Goldstein, the reason why and just how the origin and the history of the Chazars and Khazar kingdom was so well concealed from the world for so many centuries. What secret mysterious power has been able for countless generations to keep the origin and the history of the Khazars and Khazar kingdom out of history textbooks and out of classroom courses in history throughout the world? All right, that's a deep question. The origin and history of the Khazars and Khazar kingdom are certainly incontestable historical facts. These incontestable historic facts also establish beyond any question of doubt the origin and history of the so-called or self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe, the origin and history of the Khazars and Khazar kingdom, and their relationship to the origin and early history of the so-called or self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe was one of history's best-kept secrets until wide publicity was given in recent years to my research on this subject. Do you think, my dear Dr. Goldstein, that it is time this whole subject was dragged out of its hiding place? What do you guys think? Do you think it's time? In the year 1948 in the Pentagon in Washington, I addressed a large assembly of the highest ranking officers of the United States Army, principally in the G2 branch of military intelligence, on the highly explosive geopolitical situation in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Then as now, that area of the world was a potential threat to the peace of the world and to the security of this nation. I explained to them fully the origin of the Khazars and Khazar kingdom. So he's letting you know, he told everybody. This guy actually talked to very important people. He had connections. He was up there. He was telling this to people. I felt then, as I feel now, that without a clear and comprehensive knowledge of that subject, it is not possible to understand or to evaluate properly what has been taking place in the world since 1917, the year the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. It is the key to that problem. He continues saying, prior to the 10th century, the Khazar kingdom had already been reduced by Russian conquest to an area of about 800,000 square miles. As you can see on the map from the Jewish Encyclopedia, right, that's the map I showed you guys, this one right here, okay, I want you guys to know that this section right here, I know it's hard to see, but this section right here is where he's talking about Khazaria, or their empire right here. The territory of the Khazar kingdom in the 10th century was still by far the largest of any nation in Europe. The population of the Khazar kingdom was made up for the most part of Khazars, with the addition of the remnants of the population of the 25 peaceful agricultural nations which had inhabited this approximately 1 million square miles before the conquest by the invading Khazars. Alright, invading Khazars. Who was there before the Khazars, huh? In the 1st century BC, the Khazars had invaded Eastern Europe from their homeland in Asia. They were coming from where? Asia. The Khazars invaded Eastern Europe via the land route between the north end of the Caspian Sea and the south end of the Ural Mountains. The Khazars were not Semites. They were an Asiatic Mongoloid nation. They are classified by modern anthropologists as Turco-Finns racially, okay? From time immemorial, the homeland of the Khazars was in the heart of Asia. They were a very warlike nation. The Khazars were driven out of Asia finally by the nations in Asia with whom they were continually at war. The Khazars invaded Eastern Europe to escape further defeats in Asia. The very warlike Khazars did not find it difficult to subdue and conquer the 25 peaceful agricultural nations occupying approximately 1 million square miles in Eastern Europe. You guys hear that? In a comparatively short period, the Khazars established the largest and most powerful kingdom in Europe, and probably the wealthiest also. The Khazars were a pagan nation when they invaded Eastern Europe. Their religious worship was a mixture of phallic worship and other forms of idolatrous worship practiced in Asia by pagan nations. This form of worship continued until the 7th century. The vile forms of sexual excess indulged by the Khazars as their form of religious worship produced a degree of moral degeneracy the Khazars' king could not endure. In the 7th century, King Bulan, ruler of that time of the Khazar kingdom, decided to abolish the practice of phallic worship and other forms of idolatrous worship and make one of the 3 monotheistic religions, about which he knew very little, the new state religion. After a historic session with representatives of the 3 monotheistic religions, King Bulan decided against Christian and Islam and selected as the future state religion as the religious worship then known as Talmudism, and now known in practice as Judaism. This even is well documented in history. Okay, these are facts, guys. King Bulan and his 4,000 feudal nobles were promptly converted by rabbis imported from Babylonia for that event. Phallic worship and other forms of idolatry were thereafter forbidden. The Khazar kings invited large numbers of rabbis to come and open synagogues and schools to instruct the population in the new form of religious worship. It was now the state religion. The converted Khazars were the first population of so-called or self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe. So-called or self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe after the conversion of the Khazars, the descendants of the Khazars converted to Talmudism, or as it is now known, Judaism. By the 7th century, mass conversions of the Khazar population. After the conversion of King Bulan, none but a so-called or self-styled Jew could occupy the Khazar throne. The Khazar kingdom became a virtual theocracy. The religious leaders were the civil administrators also. The religious leaders imposed the teachings of the Talmud upon the population as their guide to living. The ideologies of the Talmud became the axis of political, cultural, economic, and social attitudes and activities throughout the Khazar kingdom. The Talmud provided civil and religious law. It might be very interesting for you, Mr. Dear Goldstein, if you have the patience to allow me to quote for you here from Volume 6, pages 1 to 5 of the Jewish Encyclopedia. The Jewish Encyclopedia refers to the Khazars as Chazars. The 2 spellings are optional, according to the best authorities. The 2 are pronounced alike, either Khazar or Chazar, or Khazar, right, is the real pronunciation. Either Khazar or Chazar is pronounced like the first syllable of custom, with the words Khazar added onto it. It is correctly pronounced Khazar. The Jewish encyclopedia has 5 pages on the Chazars, but I will skip through them. All right, so he's showing you the map again that we saw. And again, that was the section I was trying to highlight. Again, he underlined where it says Jews is the Chazars, okay? Those your so-called Jews. And so he's quoting again the encyclopedia, what we read earlier. It says Chazars, a people of Turkish origin whose life and history are interwoven with the very beginning of the history of the Jews of Russia, driven on by nomadic tribes of the steppes and by their own desire for plunder and revenge. All right, who's the Chazars? We already read all this, okay? Continuing, it says, when the Khazars in the 1st century BC invaded Eastern Europe, their mother tongue was an Asiatic language, referred to in the Jewish encyclopedia as the Khazar languages. They were primitive Asiatic dialects without any alphabet or any written form. When King Bulan was converted in the 7th century, he decreed that the Hebrew characters he saw in the Talmud and other Hebrew documents was thereupon to become the alphabet for the Khazar language. The Hebrew characters were adopted to the phonetics of the spoken Khazar language. The Khazars adopted the characters of the so-called Hebrew language in order to provide a means for providing a written record of their speech. The adoption of the Hebrew characters had no racial, political, or religious implication, okay? It was just converts. The so-called or self-styled Jews throughout the world today of Eastern European origin make up at least 90% of the world's total present population of so-called or self-styled Jews. The conversion of King Bulan and the Khazar nation in the 7th century accomplished for Talmudism, or for Judaism, as Talmudism is called today, what the conversion of Constantine and the Western European nations accomplished for Christianity. All right, I'm going to go ahead and belly flop to this part of the book. It says, throughout the world, the Oxford English Dictionary is accepted as the most authoritative and authentic source for information on the origin, definition, and use of words in the English language. Authorities in all fields everywhere accept the Oxford English Dictionary brings out clearly the Judaist and Judaic are the correct forms for the proper and incorrect misused and misleading Jews and Jewish. You will agree completely with the Oxford English Dictionary if you consider the matter carefully. Judaist and Judaic are correct. Jews and Jewish are incorrect. Jew and Jewish do not belong in the English language if the use of the correct words is of interest to the English-speaking peoples. The so-called or self-styled Jews cannot truthfully describe themselves as Jews because they are not in any sense Judeans. All right, that's a deep one, and that's the truth. It was actually Jude, J-U-D-E, right? German Jude. That was people from the tribe of Judah, or from Judea, the city of Judea, Judeans, or the tribe of Judah, Judeans. They can correctly identify themselves by their religious belief if they so wish by identifying themselves as Judaist. A Judaist is a person who professes so-called Judaism as his religious belief, according to the Oxford English Dictionary. The origin of Jew has not its roots in Judaism as explained. The adjective form of Judaism is Judaic. Jewish as an adjective is just as incorrect as Jew is as a noun. Jewish has no reason to exist, okay? That's from the Oxford Dictionary. Well-planned and well-financed publicity by so-called or self-styled Jews in English-speaking countries in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries created a wide acceptance and use for Jewish. Jewish is being used today in many ways that are no less fantastic and grotesque than incorrect and inaccurate. All right, it has no reason to exist.
You could try to play, but you're never gonna beat me. Look the other way, what I'm doing ain't easy. Bloody hands stained from the people who deceive me. Muddy hands break through the chains, go free me. Looking for change, looking for pain. Pulling a mob, pushing a train. I'll never stop, stick to a lane. Pick up the pieces and go rearrange. I'll be the best above all the rest, put me to the test and expect nothing less, your check as I'm chess, what's happening next, yeah. He got the venom, a tangible weapon, no coming in second. This life is a lesson, he got a new engine from pain, it's a blessing. New focus, no guessing, just bold and obsession. All in his possession, you got their attention. I'll leave an impression and take your redemption. Just kill, no discretion, your mind is a weapon. 11-11, it's time for progression, You could try to play, but you're never gonna beat me. Look the other way, what I'm doing ain't easy. Bloody hands stained from the people who deceive me. Muddy hands break through the chains, go free me. People like sheep move feet, hurt it easy. You don't wanna be fast asleep when they scheming. Better stand tall, ready for a fight, believe me. When they try the chains, you can say no, free me. So he's been looking for somebody who could save him, instead of searching inside for what they gave him. A strong will, strong mind causes mayhem. We could change the world, change times, rearrange them. Staying on pace, running the race. Life is a chase, I don't want a place, I wanna be first. Work till it hurts, dehydrated thirst till I'm in a hearse. High ambitions in the right mind can take you so far. It's like you lived a few lifetimes. Take off from a break off from the weak minds. They can stay soft. You can change lives, you create thoughts, never waste time. You got one shot, you got one life. Better pop off. What do you like? Make a dream job. No 9-5, no mean boss. Just my life and free thoughts. You could try to play, but you're never gonna beat me. Look the other way, what I'm doing ain't easy. Bloody hands stained from the people who deceive me. Muddy hands break through the chains, go free me. People like sheep move feet, hurt it easy. You don't wanna be fast asleep when they scheming. Better stand tall, ready for a fight, believe me. When they try the chains, you can say no, free me.